High atop a hill in the heart of Colorado is a medieval-style castle. It overlooks the majesty of the Rockies Front Range. It is home to herds of wildlife and a treasure of art and history. In it lived a lady who had a precious gift. A jewel in the Rockies, the story of Cherokee Ranch. Chapter 1, An Heiress. Mildred Montague Genevieve Kimball was born of English and Scottish descent on June the 18th, 1914. Even before she was born, her father, who was a West Point cavalry officer, had nicknamed her Tweed in a letter to her mother, a one-time Italian countess. Being born into a prominent Tennessee family, Tweed's childhood years were blessed with travel, exposing her to history, art, and business. She gained a love of animals and ranching from the surroundings of her family plantation.
I'm an heiress for antique furniture, but not for money. Anyway, I did inherit a lot of antique furniture from my mother and father, and grandmother, and great-grandparents.
The early influences were nurtured further through her schooling at Bryn Mawr College, where she studied the history of art and architecture. Her marriage to a diplomat fed her passion for collecting through travel and living in England after World War II. But by 1954, Tennessee heiress Tweed Kimball had decided to get a divorce and was looking for a new home for herself and her two sons.
I was determined to buy some property and bring up my two children, 4 and 5 years old, in the country, but near a city that had cultural advantages and where they probably could go to private schools. So I really was looking at where I grew up in Tennessee or in Virginia. And then my husband said to me, I suppose if you go back there, you would talk about me, all our cousins. I said, why not? Oh, he said, if that's going to happen, I'll buy you anything you want so long as it's west of the Mississippi. That changed my search considerably. I decided to take advantage of the offer.
Chapter 2, The Castle. In the early 1920s, a wealthy insurance executive and real estate gentleman from Boston named Charles Alfred Johnson was living in Denver and wanted to build a weekend country house for his family. He had purchased some land on a mesa adjacent to Daniels Park and overlooking Sedalia in Douglas County, Colorado. Mr. Johnson hired the renowned and distinguished architect Burnham Hoyt, who is also known for designing the Red Rocks Amphitheater west of Denver and the original Denver Public Library. Johnson's initial intent was to build a simple place that might reflect a design influenced by his travels abroad. But the family's needs made the plans evolve to a grander scale. The Johnson residence contract was an architect's dream, as Burnham Hoyt later described it to Tweed.
He said, Bernie, I bought this mesa and I would like to have an all-year house. I don't know a thing about architecture. It's up to you. You build anything you want, I'll pay for it. I'm going to Europe. Well, this was the beginning of what Burnham Hoyt, whom I later knew when I came here in '54, said was the best contract he ever had. He said I was given complete carte blanche to do what I wanted.
So Hoyt began his design for the residence based on a 15th century Scottish castle. Each room was designed to reflect an evolution of architectural styles, with the change of periods from 1450 to 1920. Hoyt brought 30 Cornish stonemasons, who were renowned for their excellent work with rock, to craft the castle, quarrying a volcanic form of granite called rhyolite from the surrounding mountain itself.
All the rock was quarried off the ranch. On the top of this mesa over on the other bluff, we do know that 150 million years ago, the big mountains were pushed up and the hot volcanic rhyolite, or lava rock, poured over this mesa, leaving a 30-foot deep layer. And Mr. Hoyt had this imaginative idea of quarrying the rhyolite and making his castle. He also was able to use quite a lot of sedimentary rock, which shows evidence of having lain in the water and metamorphosed. Also, he found a great deal of petrified wood on the ranch and used it artistically in the building. The arch to the courtyard of the castle is set up with complete tree trunks of petrified wood.
Each stonemason had a distinct cutting style or signature, and Hoyt ensured continuity throughout the interior by assigning each a particular set of arches, headers, or mantles. All but one craftsman finished his work.
The man who was hired to do special decorative carving was not one of the Cornish stonemasons. He was an artist, and he did the fireplace, and very handsomely, with the pineapple of hospitality and squirrels and leaves and almost acanthus-type leaves on the corbels. Then he did one corbel, and he did a certain part of the facade of the front door, and he disappeared. It seems that he was an alcoholic. He came back 2 months later. Mr. Hoyt was furious. He told him what he thought of him. And of course, the man simply said, "I'm an artist. I can't be spoken to this way." And he left. And the rest of the corbels are not carved. And the rest of the facade and the front door is not finished.
The castle eventually measured 11,000 square feet with 26 rooms, including 8 bedrooms, a great hall, a minstrel's loft, 8 fireplaces, and 4 turrets.
The house, because of the great detail, took 2.5 years to build. The roof is of slate, as a Scottish castle would be, but whereas a Scottish castle would be all gray slate, this comes from Vermont, so it has delightful color in it, and it's put on from the bottom to the top with copper nails. The beams around the building are hand-adzed in the 1450 style, and the drains are all copper, and a great deal of detail was attended to by Burnham Hoyt, the architect. He was a very thorough person with a tremendous historical knowledge about architecture. He's had a lot of fun in the house.
The castle was completed in 1926 and was known as Charlford, named after the Johnsons' 2 sons, Charles and Gifford. The family spent their first summer of residence there in 1927. It became their main residence until 1939, when they purchased a second home in Denver. During the war years, the family began using Charlford only in the summer, until 1950, when Mrs. Johnson died. Shortly thereafter, Charles Johnson, who was in his 80s, moved to California for his health. The 2 sons, Charles and Gifford, decided to sell. Upon arriving at the Johnson Castle, Tweed Kimball knew it was what she had been dreaming of. Only a castle such as Charlford would be worthy of her collections. It was as if architect Burnham Hoyt had designed it just for her. Tweed bought the castle in 1954 and renamed it Cherokee Ranch, after the Indian tribe which had once inhabited the land she had grown up in Tennessee. Tweed Kimball's lifelong passion for history and collecting art had found a perfect home. Her other dream was to raise a special breed of cattle called Santa Gertrudis, and Cherokee Ranch was just the place for it. Chapter 3, Cattle Ranching. Cattle ranching was not new to Colorado, but the breed that Tweed was interested in was. The Santa Gertrudis breed was developed between 1908 and 1920 at the King Ranch in Texas. In 1940, they were recognized as the first purebred breed in the United States. The reddish-colored Santa Gertrudis are a cross between the Brahma cattle of India and the Texas Shorthorn. The bulls weigh in at up to 3,000 pounds.
I was fascinated with these cattle. My father and I had seen them in Kentucky in '38, and I had never forgotten them.
In 1954, the Santa Gertrudis were known only to live in warm climates, and there was some question as to whether they could survive further north. Tweed purchased 29 cows and 2 bulls and brought them to Colorado. Their cattle survived well in the colder climate, and in 1961, Tweed started the Rocky Mountain Association of Santa Gertrudis breeders. The Cherokee Ranch herd thrived, and the champion bloodline has been sold around the world.
Our business is based on genetics, on lots of unrelated families, so that people can come back and buy a new bloodline.
The bloodline of Tweed's cattle are in countries as far away as
Zimbabwe to Australia to Canada to South America, and even in Taiwan. These are all weaners. These are all, except for a lame cow who's in here resting her hip where she twisted it, I think, in a prairie dog hole. But the others are children who've been taken off their mothers, and they actually get fed twice a day, and it's a growth pattern. They'll be in here at least 140 days, and then they'll go to a weaner corral. Very good conformation. Very good, very short sheath. A lot of meat's going to go down the hind quarter. Anybody with a green tag is a heifer. Anybody with an orange tag is a bull. This is a little champion, just a baby. That's Red Butler himself. Red Butler. He's coming down here to tell these other bulls, these are my girls.
Tweed's Santa Gertrudis were not readily welcomed by fellow cattle ranchers in Colorado, nor at the National Western Stock Show. But Tweed was persistent and led the fight to have the breed accepted. She was eventually successful, and her cattle have won numerous awards. One of her prize bulls is named Autocrat.
He's a really pretty bull, aren't you? Aren't you a really pretty bull? Oh, you are a pretty bull. My idea of a pretty bull is this bull. He's the son of a grand champion, and he's a grand champion, and he has a son. You'll see who's a grand champion. Must run in the family. The women did have something to do with it, some pretty good cows. He's a totally different bloodline from this one and that one. They're all different, different families, which is what makes the genetics important. And we pick the right cow for the right bull. If you're successful, you call it a good nick. Anyway.
Tweed's passion for history and her love of animals are apparent when you hear the names she gave each of them.
He's in here, Galahad is in here with Amun-Ra. This is Amun-Ra, you know, the sun god in Egypt.
One of her favorite bulls was Cherokee Minotaur, who has been immortalized with a monument that Tweed commissioned Sedalia sculptor Bill Duncan to create.
The Minotaur was born about 1956 and lived to the fantastic age of 17. And he was such a valuable bull, we put him down in the corral and brought the very best cows to him that summer, last summer, and he bred 40 cows and dropped dead of exhaustion.
I wonder why.
Well, he had a good life, and he enjoyed it. Here's Rhett. See, he's just a young bull. He's not as big as his cows, but he's a good breeder. He's up and at 'em. I like you. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we should push on, I think.
Chapter 4, Art and Heritage. Tweed Kimball had a life that was rich in travel and experiences. She inherited her appreciation for history and art from her family, starting at an early age.
Conversation around the table was about history and art, and the house was full of it. You know, it was second nature, really. Then as I grew older, I had to learn to identify all the furniture in the house, of which there was a great deal of antique furniture and periods of architecture. So I had early training in my current interest in that. We're strong people on genealogy. We know who they were and where things came from.
And this is my great-grandmother, whose plantation was burned by Captain Dahlgren. He was a Yankee. He came down the river toward Richmond, and when he got to Goochland County, he burned all the plantations. And this lady, I knew when she was 95. She lived with us, and she said, I can describe to this day Captain Dahlgren and his troopers galloping into the courtyard of the house, saying, well, madam, you may save a little furniture, and burning all the slave quarters. And she said, why are you burning the slave quarters? You say you want to help the slaves. And he said, because we don't want you to have that help. You won't have any corn, you won't have any cotton or tobacco. They had tobacco. And she begged him to save her house. And she was very pretty. And he didn't burn her house. And he burned everybody else's house around there. And they hated her. They said, why did she get away with it? It really made her very unpopular. But she had nothing left. The people couldn't stay. She had to lock up the house and go to Richmond and stay with her mother-in-law, with her children for the war, the Civil War. And her husband died of wounds. He was a Confederate, and he had a hard war. They all had a hard war, very much impoverished. And this is a Grinling Gibbons carving. He was the man who did all the pews in St. Paul's Cathedral, and his great friend was the architect, Sir Christopher Wren, so I put Wren in there, you see. But the thing about this man that's so good is how deep his carving. You see that freehand carving.
Tweed's early cultural experiences took a formal path when she attended Bryn Mawr College, majoring in the history of art and architecture.
This knight in armor predates he predates Columbus, Christopher Columbus. His armor is made about 1450. As you see, this helps him hold his spear. This is when he gallops towards you and spears you. This is to catch your blood so it won't get on his gauntlet and make it slippery. Very practical. You try to run your spear under him there. About 30 years later, they developed a gorget that would deflect it. This is a very famous portrait of Isabella d'Este, who was beautiful and rich and married to the Marchesa di Mantua in Italy. And as you recall, in the 1500s, there were city-states, the Medicis, the Sforzas, and the Mantuas. And they had portraits themselves made to give each other. When this portrait was painted, she was 60, and she told Titian, I want to look 30. So he looked at a portrait by Franciaruolo and made her look 30.
All of Tweed's life, she acquired treasures from her travels.
These are William Penn's pamphlets that he sold on the streets of London about 1674. And of course, it made a lot of trouble for Charles II. It was politics, and he was criticizing the king. And this one is called Liberty of Conscience, and defended and debated. And it only has WP, it doesn't say William Penn. And I think that this is 1674. Well, when I bought them, they were just pamphlets, but I had them folded, backed in 17th century calf. And of course, we know that Charles had so much trouble with William Penn that he gave him Penn's Woods, Pennsylvania, a big grant of land, and Penn went off to America. Got him out of the country, got rid of him. This is very amusing. I've been to Dolly Madison and James Madison's home, and they still have the clay with which they made glass. And so I could buy a piece from Dolly Madison's clay mold, and this is fun. Let me see, this says wedding day, and they're smiling. And then this says 3 weeks later, and they're frowning. Take a look.
Many dignitaries and special guests have graced the halls of the castle.
This is Princess Princess Alexandra and her husband, Sir Angus Ogilvy, and I had a party for them when they were here. And then Princess Anne is somewhere around here. Here she is. She was all in yellow there, very pretty. I had a party for her. She was here about 6 days. We call this the Churchill Room because of the pictures of Sir Winston. Those two prints over there are original 1901 prints of Winston when he was first a member of Parliament. And they're really caricatures of him that appeared in Mayfair magazine in England. The picture over here is a caricature in the 30s, and he was warning that Hitler was serious. We must get an Air Force going and a tank corps going, and no one believed him. Everyone believed in Chamberlain. And this is the portrait by Karsh of Churchill, the famous portrait. And he couldn't get this bulldog expression of Churchill, so the story is that he had his assistant holding the camera. He walked up to Churchill, snatched his cigar out of his mouth, and he got this expression and took it quickly. And that's the bulldog expression.
It's a good experience for all of us to walk into an environment that is different from our own time in history, and to have to think about the meaning of the past, because most of us don't have time to think about the past, and our life isn't involved that way.
Chapter 5, A Preserve.
Wildlife have always appealed to me. And I like the idea of their not being disturbed. I like the idea of their being able to lead their life freely. And there seems to be such lack of understanding. People do not understand that the habitat is ruined when the public intrudes on the privacy of the animal. My grandmother was very important in my early life. She was a Latin scholar, and she loved nature. I can remember trying to keep the family asleep by her getting up at 5 in the morning and taking me outdoors to identify all the trees and all the birds and any stars that were left in the sky. So we've tried hard here to leave the animals alone, and they have multiplied. We now have about 250 elk. We have about 100 mule deer. We have 2 small herds of white-tailed deer. We have antelope. We have 500 bluebird houses on the ranch, and we have a wonderful collection of birds. We have at least a pair of mountain lions. We have at least 6 bears. We have coyotes and bobcats and badgers and raccoons and the smaller fry.
Cherokee Ranch is in the heart of Douglas County, one of the fastest growing counties in the nation. Development can be seen crowding the edges of the ranch, and Tweed's concern for wildlife preservation led her to make a contract with the county by selling it a conservation easement. This will protect the land and the wildlife from encroaching development in perpetuity. Tweed's addition of over 3,000 acres next to an already preserved county open space creates a wildlife corridor that extends west all the way into the Pike National Forest.
I feel that if this habitat can preserve animals in perpetuity, it'll have great value in the future when so few people are doing anything with respect to animals. They talk about it. They have hunting licenses in the forest. They want to go see them with snowmobiles, and a snowmobile can outrun an elk and break his heart. They just don't understand. There's a whole lack of comprehension of what it takes. So we're not going to have trails on the ranch. We're going to have education.
Education, and one of the most beautiful settings on earth, is what Tweed Kimball has left for future generations. Chapter 6, A Legacy. Love of the land and respect for animals and their habitat led Tweed to form the Cherokee Ranch and Castle Foundation. It is a non-profit organization which manages the ranch and provides tours of the castle and its historic art collection.
We have school children tour the castle because there is so much here of the 15th, 16th, 17th century Anglo-Saxon tradition. And while we have a strong Spanish tradition out here and a Western pioneer tradition, we don't have a great consciousness of our debt to Anglo-Saxon settlers, the fathers of the Revolution, the founding of the 13 states. There are 16 original homesteads on the property. The homesteads that have survived are the Blunt House, 1873, and the Frederick Flower House, built in 1880. Frederick Flower raised potatoes and sold them to the local pioneers. We call that place Chickamauga. Before that, there were mountain man trails. Supposedly they came down what is now Daniels Park Road and was the first territorial road about 1861. But the mountain man trails definitely go back to the 1840s. This is very early, not as early as the 1300 AD Indians. The Natural History Museum financed an archaeologist, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson found a chamber and next to it a sweat bath kind of a room on the property. And he found artifacts and jasper arrowheads, and it showed the animals that they had eaten during this 1300 AD period, which he dated as being woodland Indians.
Children and adults are able to enjoy and experience history come to life.
There's a nice gargoyle hanging off the roof right behind you. And this is a great bull who lived to be 17, which is old for a bull.
Tweed opened her heart to many organizations and causes, and her involvement with them was a tireless effort. One of the many groups thankful for her patronage is the Birds of Prey Rehabilitation Foundation.
All right, my boy.
It'd be beautiful. Oh, it'd be beautiful. Oh, it'd be beautiful.
He's going to soar up in the sky. Watch him.
It'd be beautiful. He's free.
Yes,
He's at home,
yes.
and he knows it.
Through the legacy of the Cherokee Ranch and Castle Foundation, Tweed Kimball's great spirit will forever be a jewel in the Rockies.